name is Ana Maria Suarez Franco from FIAN International, and we are here for our event, No More Agrotoxics in Our Food and Environment, Agroecology, a key element for a just transition. First of all, I want to thank to all the co-organizers, including the Geneva Environmental Network, and especially Diana Risolio, who has been doing incredible work to make this event possible, but also the Office of the High Commissioner, the Special Procedures Division. We welcome the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, also Ciel, La Via Campesina, and CETIM, and the financial support of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. The idea today is to speak about a topic that has been present in the last panel of the Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and also in the report of the Secretary General on Climate Change and the Right to Food, and it is the transition to agroecology. Many of our organizations and in our work, we are working since many years to ensure the prohibition of high hazardous pesticides, to ensure the prohibition of exports on other prohibited pesticides. But in the peasants movement and the organizations that support them and indigenous peoples, we observe that a prohibition may not be enough, and we need alternatives. And peasant and indigenous movements are already providing an alternative, which is agroecology. So today we will go into this alternative, and we hope that all of us can learn something new and incorporate these new ideas and experiences from the field and from the experts into our work. With this, I would like to pass the floor to our moderator, Yves Lador, from Earth Justice. Also, thank you to Earth Justice for the co-sponsor and all the support in having this event. If you now have the torch, and this is our microphone, since we have Spanish, English, and French for our people in Spanish and English. No French, sorry.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria, and thank you to everybody for being here with us. And thank you for the organizers. It is quite an issue to get through all the technicalities, and thanks to all of the team. So I think you did a very good introduction, Ana Maria, so I'm not going to spend any more time in doing introductory remarks. I think what is very important is to have a global view of the challenges on this. And we have the pleasure to have with us Mr. Émile Frison, who is one of the members of IPS Food. Now, IPS Food is a very important scientific body in a way that has an approach like the IPCC, but on the food issues. So it's quite interesting, Mr. Frison, to hear your expertise from the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food System, IPS, and to see how do you see agroecology in this framework, because here in the Human Rights Council, it's not a word we use a lot. It's not something that we're very familiar with. And it could sound a bit technical and a bit like a niche issue. I know that your panel has been working on these issues. How do you see agroecology and agroecological systems in the challenges we have today for a sustainable food? Thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to make this.
And it can be heard in the different device.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I am really honored, and I think that it's a very timely discussion that we are having there about the need for a transition towards sustainable agroecological food systems. Unfortunately, still today, we are dominated by an industrial model of agriculture and food systems that is putting the emphasis on maximizing productivity at the expense of the impact on the environment and the impact on people. Fortunately, there is, with the multiple crises that we have gone through in recent years, with the COVID crisis and followed by the Ukraine war, these have shown the vulnerability of this industrial model on which is based our food system today. And more people are realizing that this cannot be continued in the future, that we need a radical transformation of our food systems. And that's where agroecology has been recognized more and more as an important way forward to address these multiple crises. So agroecology is often not well understood. First of all, the word doesn't really express the full dimension of what agroecology means. It is really looking at the entire food system from input production to consumption and waste management, the entire food system. And it aims to address simultaneously economic, environmental, nutrition, health, and social objectives, and no longer privilege the economic dimension at the expense of all the others. Today, we are still seeing some opposition to that evolution or transformation. There are vested interests, for example, the chemical input industry, that of course is trying to keep its industrial model of agriculture in place. But this must be countered, and that's why I'm very pleased to see this meeting here on the need to get rid of toxic chemicals in our food systems. We must really look at this transformation as a way to move towards a rights-based approach, and particularly the right to food, which is still undermined. And we see that the number of hungry people has been increasing in recent years, despite the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. But also agroecology is in harmony with the notion of food sovereignty, that people decide on their own food provisioning and consumption. Now, there is still a question that is often raised about agroecology. This is a small niche. It's okay to provide some better quality food for people that can afford it. And I think this is a very wrong approach. First of all, it's been demonstrated now very efficiently and scientifically that agroecological systems are able to feed the world, and I would say to better nourish the world, to provide better quality food. And some recent results obtained at large scale in India have shown that, unlike what is often claimed, that agroecological systems are less productive than an industrial model, there on a large scale it's been demonstrated that productivity is in average 11% higher, and net income is in average 49% higher. And I think this is very significant. It also allows farmers to be less dependent on the purchase of inputs and the need for credit, which is often imperilishing their livelihoods. And what is guiding the agroecological transformation is a set of 13 principles that are not aimed just at transforming the agricultural practices, but are really redesigning the entire food system. And there's a strong social dimension that is part of agroecology and the 13 principles, requiring participation of all the actors in the food system in decision making, claiming for equity as a value, also co-innovation that requires the participation of the farmers, for example, in the design of their production systems, and no longer being imposed technologies that have been designed outside of their involvement. It also pays much more attention to the quality of nutrition, to the food that is provided, and to health. And we know that still the number of people that are dying of acute poisoning by pesticides is more than 200,000 a year, but tens of millions of people are affected by diseases that are induced by these chemicals. So agroecological transformation of food systems allows us to do the transformation that aims to address these multiple dimensions, the economic, environmental, nutrition, health, and social dimensions simultaneously, and not one at the expense of the other. And we are seeing now a tremendous increase in the interest. In 2021, a coalition for food system transformation through agroecology was formed. And this counts now 49 countries, 3 regional commissions, the European Commission, the African Union Commission, and the ECOWAS Commission, and 140 organizations involving 5 UN organizations, multiple research, civil society, farmer organizations, indigenous people organizations, and philanthropic foundations. And these want to accelerate, the purpose of this coalition is to accelerate the food system transformation, to advocate for this transformation, and ensure that resources are allocated in order to accelerate the transformation. So I want to be relatively brief. I know that time is short, but I think there is a tremendous opportunity in looking at this opportunity to accelerate food system transformation through agroecology. And I'm very pleased that this is part of the agenda today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Friesen, for this general introduction. I think it was very needed, and it gives us all a good background. And we look forward to having this human rights analysis of the 13 principles you have mentioned, and because they can be a very important bridge with the work which is done here in the different human rights bodies. Let's turn now to some of the concrete experiences that are going on in the field, starting with an experience with a lot of contrast in Sri Lanka. We have the privilege to have with us Fazli Mohammed from FIAN, Sri Lanka. Please, the floor is yours. We move mic.
Yes. Can I have the presentation? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, rather than sharing the experience of agroecology, I think I am sharing the story of Sri Lanka, where it made international headlines on turning into organic, toxin-free within a very short period. And this has been referred by many international communities as a reason for not going agroecological, and why the toxic should be there. But first, I like to draw your attention to what happened in Sri Lanka, what is our experience. Because by the time the Sri Lankan government very famously took a bold decision to go toxic free and turn the entire nation within a very short period. Even it was very shocking even for the Sri Lankans who were present in there. Because the reason was the Sri Lankan government was having some foreign debt payment and foreign exchange crisis, and there's a huge shortage of foreign exchange. So the government's main objective was to save some foreign currency. So in that case, and Sri Lanka was giving a very heavy fertilizer subsidy, which is accounting to more than 90%. The government was subsidizing. To save this money of $400 million per year, the government took a decision to turn into organic, to turn the entire country into organic and ban importation of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. The ban was there only for a period of 7 months, and end of 7 months, the ban was lifted and the country went back to the normal situation. But within this period, a huge damage was caused not only for the Sri Lankan community, but for the entire world community who was promoting agroecology and toxic-free farming. So, what was the actual reason? Because the reasons for going chemical-free was, even though it was projected as a chemical-free farming method, the government reasons to go into that extent was very had many different objectives. The one was the government wanted to save the foreign exchange, and then you might wonder how a government decision can be taken within a very short period without any consultation, because at that time the political polarization, which was polarized around the executive presidency, allowed the president to make any bold decisions, and whoever raised their voice against the government decisions were somewhat portrayed in a way that they are going against the national interest. So within this kind of absolute power and absolute polarization of the people's interest, the government was able, the president was able to take any kind of decision. And even the president was very inexperienced, because he was not a politician. He was a former secretary of the defense ministry, and he looked at this problem as just he can guide the country, like how to win a war, like have all the generals together, order them, you do this and you do not this, and that kind of way he can approach the country to transit into a chemical-free nation. So within a very lack of knowledge and very short transition period, the going chemical-free was implemented. That made a huge impact on the agriculture officers who were to give the knowledge on how to go chemical-free to the farmers, and also the farmers. They also didn't know what to do, because they didn't have experience. They were totally they had experience on chemical-based farming, and this sudden change made a huge impact on farmers, and many farmers opted to skip the season because they know somehow this situation will fail, and the government will lift the ban. Once the government will lift the ban, they will have the chemicals back at the market. So until that, they have just skipped the cultivating the season. But that action by the farmers made a huge scarcity in the food market, and also more than the scarcity, the opportunistic traders who were handling the large-scale paddy rice market, and they have saw an opportunity where they can intervene into the situation, and they can hoard some of the existing products and gain huge profit. So within a short period, everything was going on haywire. Like there were many panic about food shortage. Then many people, the government was raiding the storerooms of the many companies, and there was a huge issue. And ultimately, within a very short period, prices of food items started to go high. So ultimately, the reason was, ultimately the result was there was a huge cry over the country, and the result was a huge food crisis. So within a period of 7 months, the government took back all their decision to ban the chemicals and allowed the chemicals back. That it made more bigger danger because over a period of many years, Sri Lanka has slowly banned many harmful chemicals. But when the ban was lifted, it was effective not only for the chemicals banned in the recent period, but also for the previous ones. So this situation has allowed many banned chemicals to the market and also many cheap counter brands flood into the market. So it was made a huge change in the consumption of food because the toxics have penetrated without any restriction. And to make this possible, the global toxic cartels, they have invested heavily on the academics and to promote the toxic is essential. The agrochemicals are essential, and this cannot be the farming cannot be done without the agrochemicals. So ultimately, that debate, the agrochemical companies, they have won, and now this is not only making headlines in Sri Lanka alone, but all over the world. Many toxic cartels, the agrochemical companies are pointing at Sri Lanka, saying that, see, this is what happened. If you not use the chemicals, so the country will go on starving, and there will be huge food crisis. But I want to make clear that the decision is not the food crisis didn't came because of the banning of agrochemicals, but because of lack of planning and moving to the situation without any transitional period. You can't expect a country to go into a toxic-free nation within just a period of 6 months. But that's what happened. And ultimately, the agroecology, the chemical-free farming was branded as the culprit. So, on the other hand, if we look at the Sri Lankan situation, the chronic kidney disease, which is found among the agricultural communities, is relatively very high in Sri Lanka, and also that's been found in many other countries as well. And there's an alarming situation that in some agricultural districts and within some very specific regions, there are up to 15 to 22% of the population are affected by these chronic diseases. And there are many culprits, but the Government Medical Associations Officers Association, GMO, has documented 50 plus evidence-based studies to point out there's some sort of demonstrable link between the agrotoxins and the chronic kidney disease. Because all these villages are being reported closer to the irrigation canals, where the peoples in the higher mountain use high amount of agrochemicals, and this water is being run off, and it's being polluted the wells along the irrigation canals. So this is some kind of study which need further studies. But on the on the closing remarks, there has been some crisis period, but now it's been settled a little bit, and now there has been a very growing agroecological movement within Sri Lanka, and we have enjoyed very high certified organic products export to the European Union and to many of the world countries. That growing demand was one of the reasons what made the president think he can turn the entire nation into organic. That situation has some, it has some drawbacks, some obstacle during the going the chemical free period, but now again it's been picking up. As of now, there are about 400 plus big and small companies which is exporting certified organic products, and for a nation like Sri Lanka, a small nation, that's a very remarkable number. And also there are Sri Lanka has been an agroecological nation for a very long period. It has a long history of 2,000 plus years, and it has one of the world's best traditional models known as Candian forest gardens. Sri Lanka was known as a spice garden, spice island. There are so many spice-related agroecological models which has been practiced on the traditionally, which do not need any kind of chemical inputs, no fertilizer, no chemical inputs, but it's been totally managed by the ecology itself. The ecology fertilize the situation, the ecology take control of the pest, and now within that toxic-free period, some farmers had a small experience with how to convert their farm into toxic-free model. So that kind of small positive thing is also there, and again, that movement is picking up. And I asked the world leaders and all the other interested parties not to follow the Sri Lankan example of the toxics. The ban of toxics has made a way to loss of the creation of food crisis, but look into the real problem where more deep structural situations in the system has created the issue, and within a period of 6 months, it has been changed. But we don't want to make the impact to last longer. The bad name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed, for this for your presentation. It was quite an important element to have in our discussion, because the impact of what happened in Sri Lanka is very big, and it has to be characterized for what it was. It was an instrumentalization to cover a governance failure, and had nothing to do at the basis with agroecology in any way. So agroecology was used as a pretext to cover a governance failure, and this cannot be acceptable. And we have to put the facts straight, and really hope all the best for the Sri Lankan people and the Sri Lankan farmers to recover after such a terrible episode in the country's history. As you said, Mr. Mohammed, there are a number of different traditional agroecological models, and we're very happy now to turn to one of them, which is being experienced in Latin America. And I'm happy to give the floor to Mrs. Angela Castillo from the Minga Agroecologica del Sur. Apologies for my bad pronunciation. And the floor is yours for sharing with us all of your experience. Thank you very much.
Un cordial saludo para todas y todos. El movimiento agroecológico latinoamericano y del Caribe MAELA es la articulación de organizaciones campesinas, indígenas, comunidades sin tierra, organizaciones de mujeres, jóvenes y consumidores que impulsamos la agroecología como alternativa para la construcción de la soberanía alimentaria y una forma factible para una transición justa que reduzca las asimetrías sociales y ambientales generadas por la agroindustria y el extractivismo existente en espacios rurales. Son múltiples las experiencias en Latinoamérica y el Caribe con diseños e implementaciones sustentables que integran saberes ancestrales, tradicionales y conocimientos científicos. La agroecología da una nueva vida a la agricultura porque se acompaña de principios ecológicos, socioculturales, políticos y económicos. Los agroecosistemas presentes en fincas, chagras, milpas, huertas, entre otras formas de trabajo en la tierra, son espacios para la sostenibilidad de la vida humana y no humana, porque ahí se generan múltiples interacciones y relacionamientos físicos, energéticos, socioeconómicos y culturales. Nuestra apuesta es llevar la agroecología a más familias, más comunidades, más territorios. Consideramos que la transición agroecológica debe ser asumida como un proceso que tiene múltiples etapas y múltiples dimensiones. voy a mencionar 3 dimensiones de la transición agroecológica. La primera dimensión de la transición es la técnica y la productiva, que permita pasar de sistemas agrícolas convencionales a una sustitución de insumos. Esta es la etapa más crítica para los campesinos y campesinas. Posteriormente, se pasa al diseño de agroecosistemas sustentables que luego nos permitan consolidar paisajes agroecológicos en los cuales el suelo, el agua y las semillas recuperen sus funciones ecosistémicas y la producción de alimentos sea una actividad en la cual se cuide a la naturaleza, pero también a los campesinos, campesinas y trabajadores de la tierra. La segunda dimensión de la transición agroecológica será social y ecológica, en la cual los productores y los consumidores realicemos un pacto conjunto de aprendizaje colaborativo para que las relaciones sean cada vez más democráticas y éticas, económicamente justas y solidarias. De ahí la importancia de las ferias, los intercambios y los mercados locales. La tercera dimensión de la transición agroecológica es la política e institucional a nivel de territorios locales, regiones y países, que permita la generación de regulaciones que prohíban los agrotóxicos, fomenten procesos de educación para generar capacidades técnicas innovadoras y cambiar el sistema convencional de extensión agropecuaria basado en recetas y fórmulas por metodologías de campesino a campesino en las cuales se comparten prácticas agroecológicas simples y efectivas. Como movimiento social en América Latina advertimos sobre el riesgo de cooptación y el despojo de la agroecología de su contenido más político por parte de la agroindustria corporativa en su deseo de incorporar un discurso más verde. Por lo anteriormente expuesto, la agroecología a la que invitamos transitar es una agroecología campesina, étnica, comunitaria y feminista, con fuertes procesos de autonomía y gobernanza. Quisiera comentar el caso colombiano, país de donde vengo en este momento. La agroecología ha sido construida durante los últimos años por múltiples organizaciones rurales que la han asumido como una alternativa alimentaria, pero también como una opción de construcción de paz territorial. Por medio de distintas técnicas de producción, el fortalecimiento a la organización social, el desarrollo de escuelas de formación y los mercados campesinos y locales. Recientemente estamos incursionando en acciones de incidencia política para la consolidación de un marco legislativo que incorpore la agroecología a la agenda de la política pública rural, lo cual es clave para superar la inseguridad alimentaria, el deterioro ambiental y la aguda crisis socioambiental que afronta el país. También para implementar los planes nacionales de la reforma rural integral del Acuerdo de Paz y la adopción de la UNDROP, que ya ha sido incorporado en nuestra Constitución Nacional. Finalmente, invito a las personas y organizaciones aquí presentes a caminar junto al movimiento agroecológico y sumar acciones que nos lleven a una transición socioecológica justa a nivel planetario. Gracias.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much for this your presentation, and also reminding us that agroecology, it's just not greening. And we had a discussion yesterday on greenwashing, and that it can not be used just for greenwashing, and it has a number of issues and principle that must be included. Now we are turning still with these different example of experiences to Zainal Arifin Fouad, who is member of La Via Campesina. And so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and many thanks for inviting me in this good event, because this is also linked with our daily struggle towards agroecology. So if we discuss about agroecology today, actually we want to going back to our first agroecology. The meaning is before colonization, in which there was a monoculture, changed our agricultural system, and then also because of the green revolution since 1970. So why? Because there are many negative impact of the green revolution. So why we now back to the agroecology? So we can say now we are in the third era to agroecology movement. Yes, we of course there are several aspects of the agroecology, yeah, as a science, as science or knowledge, as a skill, as public policy, and also economic. La Via Campesina conducting the first global encounter of agroecology and business seed in Surin, Thailand in 2012. So we already declared our principle that agroecology is our alternative to saving from the green revolution. So in Surin declaration, we said that we have I quote our member in Philippines. So he said agroecology is kabuhan, kalusugan, and kalikasan. Or archaeology is for economy, for health, and for nature. This also have already quote in the UN draft, especially in Article 15 and also Article 18. So this principle actually also the same with FAO theme uh, declared last year, I think, that it is the agroecology is to have for better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better livelihood. So this part of the why we are in the link for the agroecology today. Yes, of course we can say as because of the revolution we have trouble in the damage of the environment, especially on the soil for our production, and then second for food safety, because it's the agrotoxic, so our food is not safety again. And then the important thing is also about the dependency of peasant to chemical agriculture, pesticide, and industrial seed from corporation. So that makes we are in trouble in thing of the socio-economy environment and also healthy. Then of course we are happy and glad that finally FAO opened windows for agroecology. In 2014, there are global symposium of agroecology in Rome, and then expand to the regional symposium of agroecology in Asia, in Africa, in Latin Africa, and the last in China. And then in 2017, as FAO also conducted the symposium of agroecology with the slogan "Scale out and scale up of agroecology." But for us, it is also contain also the gray area, as my comrade said, that greenwashing. So that means that agroecology might be bring to the industrial agroecology system. That means fertilizer, organic fertilizer produced by corporation, by company. So then peasants become dependent again with this fertilizer. So we have to be careful with this because the agroecology is part of our effort to become sovereignty, dependence, independence, not dependent with the other actor. So why we are in the one set we are happy now is that agroecology has become more scale out and scale up, but in the other hand we also worry and also be careful with the agroecology hub uh, 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 resulted from the UN Food System Summit. Well, in our experience and in our daily work, we implement agroecology in territory. So we build the many food sovereignty areas in our territory, and also we establish school of agroecology. And also La Campesina have many school of agroecology as to part of the agroecology movement. I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think you really underlined very well not only what we have heard before is that you have a number of traditional agricultural systems who were basically the basis of agroecology, who are the name of agroecology before. It's a recent name for a very old and very well proven practices. But you also underline how much it has been recognized now also at the international level, although we're fearing some backlash. But also you underline something which is very important and that have been mentioned here and there, which is UNDROP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and the other constituencies which constitute rural societies. And I think in these rights under this declaration, we have a number of elements which should be taken into consideration in the policies which are done in the agricultural field. And it's not just having something green, it's much more than that. And so the rights of indigenous people, the rights of peasants, all of them have to be included in agroecology. So now, in order to facilitate this transition to agroecology, or to get back to the roots of agriculture, we could also put it like that. I'm happy to turn now to Mrs. Sibyl Diran from FIAN International with the recommendation that has been elaborated by this organization in this field. Sibyl, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. Yes, I think we have seen it, and we have seen it in the examples that and the triple planetary crisis that maintaining the status quo is no longer viable, and we have to embark urgently on a just transition towards also different economic systems that are fair, healthy, and sustainable. And therefore, we also, as FIAN International, published a briefing on a just transition to agroecology, which we will be happy to share with you, and is available online in 3 languages. So what we did at FIAN, we looked at the concept of a just transition from the perspective of the right to food and nutrition. And we argue that only a systemic, multisectoral, and human right-based transition can guarantee a safe, sustainable, and just future for all of us. So such a transition, in order to be just, must address the socioeconomic inequalities, also including gender equalities, and transform processes of marginalization and exploitation that have always benefited the very same groups. So the rights of women, indigenous peoples, workers, peasants, fishers, pastoralists, and other small-scale food producers must provide the parameters for a truly equitable, just, and sustainable transformation of food systems. So we argue that the crucial role that agroecology plays in such a transition has not been recognized, and it has not been reflected in existing regulatory frameworks. And therefore, we developed a set of recommendations that I would like to share with you. So the recommendations are based on, please, if you can
just put through. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, there was a presentation, but
It's coming back.
okay. So yeah, the recommendations are based on the experiences of transition, some we heard here and many others. And Fian identified concrete regulatory and public policy measures, elements that states should adapt to advance agroecology. So first of all, what we also heard is transition processes have to be planned well. So states should develop and adopt binding transition plans and also allocate financial resources to the necessary budget items, which include, among others, gender-sensitive support mechanisms for rural and indigenous peoples in line with UNDRIP, UNDROP, CEDAW, and the ILO conventions. The states have to recognize indigenous peoples, peasants, small-scale fishers, pastoralists, and other rural peoples' knowledge, practices, and innovations, and rigorously implement their rights to effective, meaningful, and informed participation to define priorities, policy options, and implementation approaches. Transform agricultural subsidy system and extension services to provide appropriate support to small-scale food producers and ensure access to essential services and adequate support for agroecological food producers. And another important area is phasing out agrotoxics and ensure liability. We have concrete recommendations to ban pesticides or active ingredients. And here a truly comprehensive ban covers manufacturing, usage, distribution, and commercialization of pesticides. So starting with hazardous pesticides, then continuing with pesticides that are already prohibited in regulating countries, and lastly, reducing other pesticides that also harm the environment or affect food safety. Create agroecological zones that are free of agrotoxic, including pesticides, chemical fertilizer, and GMOs at national and subnational level, and establish clear liability regulations for damages caused by agrotoxics. So in the case of highly hazardous pesticides, the most effective measure is to impose strict liability regimes. Furthermore, in the case of damages caused by pesticides, the burden of proof must lie with the production and distribution companies and not with the affected individuals or communities. Another important area is support territorial markets at local, national, and regional levels and ensure the access of agroecological producers to markets with fair prices that reflect living wages, and to promote and prioritize the consumption of peasants' agroecological products, for example, through government procurement contracts for school feeding. Support social solidarity economies, including rural people's cooperatives, and promote rural universities and other spaces to build capacity and exchange experience to co-create knowledge on agroecological practices. And finally, to reorient public agriculture research and training to incorporate agroecology into national and academic research programs and support inclusive and participatory agricultural research. To ensure that the protection of peasants and indigenous people, to ensure that the protection of peasants and indigenous people's traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices, particularly in the context of intellectual property policies, and to include, this includes also prohibiting patents and all other forms of intellectual property rights or genetic sequencing that to avoid biopiracy. Other recommendations are to take measures to prevent undue interference by corporations and related actors in transition processes, and to ensure the accountability of companies that fail to comply with established regulations or interfere with the implementation of transition plans. and to reverse discriminatory structural policies against agroecology, including budgetary benefits, trade advantages, tariff barriers, and investment protection measures, and end harmful agricultural subsidies that benefit large agribusinesses. Also, one more. To stop the public funding of partial research that is unduly disqualifying agroecology and justifying the use of agrotoxics, and ensure the establishment of adequate policies to prevent conflict of interest. And to the very last area of recommendations, it's important to ensure small-scale food producers access to and control over land and other natural resources, so that they are able to practice agroecology. And this may include agrarian reforms, and ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of peasants and indigenous peoples' rights to save, use, exchange, and sell their seeds, including by legally recognizing their distinct seed management system and safeguarding their right to decide on the crop species and varieties that they wish to grow. I will stop here, and I'm happy to share the recommendations more, and I'll give back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for these very clear and well elaborated principles and recommendations. So now let me turn to the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, Professor Marcos Orellana, who's been leading these Geneva Toxic-Free talks. We didn't have much the opportunity yet to talk about the agricultural sector in these talks this year. So we're very happy to do this at this moment. But actually your mandate, even some of your predecessors, have worked on the impact of agrotoxics, which is pretty huge throughout the world. So we're very happy to hear now your thoughts on the situation and on the challenge to make a transition to agroecology within the framework of the UN human rights system. Special Rapporteur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. And I want to start by thanking once again the Geneva Environment Network and Earth Justice for our collaboration and partnership in the organization of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks. I would also like to thank everyone that has taken the mic in what are really insightful presentations. So I want to echo a couple of the things that have been said in offering some reflections. Emile Frisson spoke about the millions of people that every year fall ill as a result of the deliberate release to the environment of what are hazardous substances. Now, this number also must be seen in the context of the uncounted impact on future generations and the rights of future generations being involved, whether that is a result of endocrine disrupting chemicals that may have impacts on fertility, or the disabilities that are caused in IQ or neurological impairment in so many people. What does that say about society and humanity? We are facing a serious triple planetary crisis, as has been underscored by Sibylle, and we need all the intelligence that we can gather in order to find solutions to it. But in the aggregate, we're not smarter than our predecessors in the human species. As in the aggregate, we're losing intellectual coefficiency points as a result of exposure to pesticides and other chemicals. The issue of double standards, and Maria, you pointed out that this at the beginning, the export of pesticides that are banned in their countries of origin is something that the mandate has spoken about for a number of years. We were quite encouraged to see the European Union's chemical strategy for sustainability making a pledge to put an end to this abhorrent practice, and yet time goes by and we see no actual reflection of that promise in regulatory changes that would put an end to this production for export of these what are clearly poisons. Highly hazardous pesticides have no place in the international market. They must be done away with, and perhaps the 5th session of the International Conference on Chemicals Management that begins in Bonn next week could be a place to begin putting an end to highly hazardous pesticides. In the work of the mandate, there have been various tools that, as Yves, you've mentioned, my predecessors and also myself during my tenure have employed to address some of the issues that have been addressed in the panel today. Angela Castillo spoke about agroecological systems. Let me point out that in my visit to Ghana, I reported last Tuesday, the report is online, case studies of communities that are self-sufficient, that thrive, and that do not use chemical inputs and pesticides in their agricultural practices. Those communities have been the focus of attention, and there's lessons learned from their practices that are informing other communities. Unfortunately, they remain the exception rather than the rule, but they do exist, and that's an important case study, an important precedent, because it shows it can be done. Which is pushing back against the narrative, as has been laid out by Mr. Mohammed, that agro-industry is co-opting the concepts in order to say the inevitability of the use of chemicals in order to feed a climate-constrained world. Also, in my country visit to Paraguay, I also reported on this on Tuesday, I also visited the Asentamiento Crescencio González. It grows sufficient food to feed the whole of a community and even to share food with neighboring communities. So in that sense, it has become an important stakeholder and player, an actor in the debate in that country regarding the future of agroecology. But of course, these are good examples. There's also some examples that have drawn to attention that involve significant challenges. For example, in the country visit to South Africa, the use of street pesticides, illegal pesticides to deal with infestations, the exposure of workers' rights. There are various issues that can be called into attention regarding regulations. I am very pleased, however, to have received information that since the visit, the government has put out revised regulations on pesticides in order to address some of the issues that that we discussed during the visit. But as I have mentioned in other interventions, this is not an issue of just developing countries. It's a worldwide, global issue. And in my recent visit to Australia, to give an example, the regulator at the federal level has come under heavy criticism for favoring what are registrations of pesticides, but not, or deprioritizing issues of enforcement and compliance. There has been an external review. I've reported this on the end of mission statement. It's available online. And the external review has quite explicitly called about the very cozy relationship between industry and the regulator. So there's a lot that could be said about that in every country of the world, but looking at other tools that the mandate has used to shed light on these issues are letters. I did have a chance to send letters to Sri Lanka at the time that the transitional experiment was taking place, asking, among other things, what is the plan and what are the measures that the government is planning to take to support the farmers that are involved in this transition? There have been letters to Ecuador, there have been letters to Germany in regards to the export of banned pesticides. Other tools have had the opportunity to appear before the Brazilian parliament when it was discussing the so-called poison package that would have dismantled or weakened protections for public health and the environment in relation to pesticides. Also before the European Union Parliament to encourage the adoption of actual regulations to do good on the promise of putting an end to the export of banned pesticides. Two more things on my end. Time is running tight as always. Pesticides are certainly and have certainly been a focus of the mandate's work, but not exclusively. If we look back in time at the August 2020 blast of more than 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate in the port of Beirut, this certainly calls into question issues of governance and how did this material get there? What was it doing in port? How was it stored? Issues of accountability. There's still an investigation or very subsequent investigation have yielded no adequate results. The victims of the families, the families of the victims who have died, thousands of people that have been hurt, the thousands of buildings that have suffered damage, and so the housing of countless individuals and families, they're still waiting for answers, and those answers are not forthcoming. But what is not often seen is that ammonium nitrate is part of this agro-industrial toxic complex where the triple planetary crisis that has been mentioned, more than 60% of these substances end up in nitrous oxide emissions, which are gases that are 300 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas potential than CO2, that carbon dioxide. The market for these substances, more than $19 billion expected in 2026. So the divestment from nitrogen is in the agenda, something that should be seriously looked at. There are so many more things that we could talk about: fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers. But I want to close and conclude with one reflection, which is it is often argued by the agrochemical companies that in a climate change constrained world, in a hungry world, chemicals are needed in order to feed the world. And this is more of a myth than reality, as Emile Frison mentioned at the very beginning. One point that I want to underscore is the right to food does not exist in isolation from other rights. And the right to food does not only concern access to nutritious food. It concerns the way that food systems are established, the way that food is produced. And in that sense, it has interrelations with the right to life for people that lose their life as a result of exposures to hazardous substances, or the right to health, as has been mentioned, the millions of people that fall ill. There's no question about the right to a healthy environment with hazardous substances deliberately released to the environment. And one last thing then, right to science. And here, science, certainly what goes on in laboratories is relevant, but as my report to the Council on this issue may explain a couple of years ago, local knowledge, citizen science, different forms of knowledge, the importance of a dialogue and public participation, all of this comes together in shaping what is a proper decision-making process on these issues. In that regard, adequate attention to the standards in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants are critical in order to achieve that integration between these various rights. So the right to food is not seen in isolation, but in its proper place in the elaboration of food systems that will move us to agroecological systems that will achieve harmony with nature at some point. So with that, those are a few reflections. I want to thank everyone once again for taking the floor. And perhaps there may be questions and answers. Maybe there's answers. Back to you, Yves. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for your reflections on this. And indeed, there is this need to divest from agrotoxics. I think it's pretty clear after this discussion. We do have time now for a few questions. And first, before turning to the room, I just want to check whether there were also questions online so we don't forget them. There were several messages saying that people who wanted could put their questions on the chat. So please don't hesitate to do so. Now, turning to the room here, I see that there is one question. So please, we'll start with your question.
Thank you very much.
Is this the microphone is on?
Okay. Thank you. My name is Gustavo Lagos from Chile, from the Universidad Católica, and it's for Marcos. Did you say that there is a connivance or a very close relationship between regulators and industry? And I just wonder if that is a product sometimes of the lack of capacity on behalf of, of the state to deal with the number of experts which are really well funded. I've seen this many times, and I just wonder what your views.
Thank you very much for that question, Professor Lagos. I think you're putting your finger right on the spot on the issue of capacity. Several of the international regulations that exist for pesticide trade, there are some instances of management, they are premised on a certain level of capacity, and often that is non-existent in the real world. In the real world, capacity is often a fiction that underlies international regulations, but in practice, regulators may depend on what are sometimes called the industry paying scheme. So in order to get a product registered, there needs to be a fee, and that pays for the system to operate. So that creates, in a way, a bit of a conflict. But most countries in the world, and this I've seen once again in the information that my mandate receives, also in the consultations that I've carried out on these issues, people in country denounce that the regulator has no capacity to carry out risk assessments, which means that it then relies on the information of experts that have been hired by industry to pursue their economic interests. So in some instances, certainly the capture of the state by industry is a deliberate and corrupt enterprise. In many other instances, there may or not be corruption, but it is the weight of ideas and information, the gravitas that experts may have in terms of capacity that the government doesn't have. And this happens, and again, not only in the developing world, it happens in almost every country of the world, to some or less degree. So I think you're putting your finger right on the pulse of one of the key issues that explain the problems and the challenges that we're facing here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On such a question, we have the privilege to have with us the members of IPS. So perhaps I'd like to turn to Emile Prison, because I'm sure he has something to say on such an issue.
Indeed, IPS Food has written some reports on the tremendous influence that the tremendous influence that industry has been having on policymaking, and we certainly acknowledge what has been just said about this lack of capacity of countries actually to face the strong lobbying that is being made. There's also policies of what we call revolving doors, where people from industry take on a job in government and then return back to industry with the obvious the obvious interest conflict that it entails. So I think that we must not be naive in just thinking that we have a level playing field there. There's an evolution in the last couple of decades of yet more and more influence of large multinational companies, the influence they have on policies, and particularly in agriculture, in trying to put in place systems that tend to perpetuate the industrial model of agriculture. So I think the power of industry and multinational companies on setting the agenda, including also in research. So I think this is a very important point that was raised there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more comments?
I have a question.
With the mic. The mic is here.
Sí, yo tengo una pregunta quizás para Ángela o Alex o Claudia. Todos ellos trabajan en temas de agroecología y esto es que aquí se presenta como si la agroecología fuera volver a la época preindustrial. Pero en la presentación de Civil se mencionaban las innovaciones campesinas. Nosotros no estamos proponiendo devolvernos a la Edad Media, y campesinas y campesinos, así como pueblos indígenas, están desarrollando técnicas, formas, prácticas de responder a la crisis climática, incluyendo también al cambio climático. Así que no sé si de pronto Ángela o Alex o Claudia quieren responder a esta pregunta. Quizás puedes comenzar.
Sí, sin duda creo que la transición a la agroecología es una serie de innovaciones complementarias entre saberes campesinos, de poblaciones indígenas, pero también el avance de la ciencia, de una ciencia agronómica que está llamada a superar la revolución verde e integrar nuevas formas de investigación. Todos estos arreglos agroecosistémicos en el paisaje están evidenciando procesos de restauración ecológica en los cuales necesitamos evidenciar las estadísticas de los beneficios de la agroecología. Está la agricultura sintrópica que está evidenciando que se puede hacer agricultura disminuyendo la cantidad de insumos orgánicos inclusive. Entonces es ahí donde hacemos un llamado a la academia y a la ciencia para trabajar ejercicios de investigación académica y campesina. O sea, creo que es una relación horizontal que se debe generar entre la academia y las comunidades rurales.
¿Me escuchan? En un mundo donde los estados buscan responder a la crisis climática, aparecen los pueblos, las nacionalidades indígenas, las comunidades campesinas, con una solución que han venido sosteniendo durante miles de años, que es la agroecología. El paradigma agroecológico responde a una necesidad actual, responde a unas reglas de juego actuales. Sabe que la tierra, la convivencia con la tierra representa justamente son los nuevos retos frente a nuestra relación con la naturaleza. Quizá la agroecología lo que hace es justamente criticar las relaciones de poder que existen entre el ser humano y la naturaleza y más bien busca reconstruir dichas relaciones, donde en la agricultura necesariamente se convierte en una especie más de mantenimiento y sostenimiento de ecosistemas, así como lo realizan las abejas a través de
de la polinización u otros bacterias, virus. Le da de hecho visibilidad a aquellos que la revolución industrial los ha tenido ocultos. Por ejemplo, como digo, las bacterias, los virus, los hongos, que en algún momento, desde la década de 1950 más o menos, bueno, de la Revolución Verde, se los convirtió en enemigos y se los buscó atacar y se los buscó matar. De ahí el nombre, plaguicidas, herbicidas, ¿no? Fungicidas. Necesitamos matar. Si esto empezó siendo una guerra del control de la tierra, pues las armas que utilizaron para esta guerra fueron los agrotóxicos y las víctimas fueron los campesinos, pero también fue esa flora, esa fauna que luego fue considerada hierbas malas en español, no sé cómo se dice en otros lados, pero que también fueron considerados plagas a esas poblaciones que no tuvieron el suficiente alimento para resolver su vida, cuyas relaciones tróficas fueron desmanteladas y deconstruidas, y que justamente la agroecología lo que llega es a reparar esto, a reparar con los nuevos diálogos, con las nuevas dialécticas y los nuevos conocimientos.
Sí, muchas gracias, Ana María, por la pregunta. Yo quería participar inmediatamente después de uno de los comentarios del señor relator, diciendo que en el caso, por ejemplo, de Honduras, nosotros tenemos evidencias de cómo la agricultura ecológica ha aportado o ha garantizado alimentos en los momentos de crisis, sea de sequía, sea de inundaciones, con prácticas que, por ejemplo, está la protección de las semillas criollas. Hay un trabajo importante de las comunidades, incluso de hacer pequeñas modificaciones de manera natural, que ha hecho que estas semillas se condicionen a esos retos que se están generando con la variabilidad climática, con el cambio climático. Ellos mismos lo están haciendo y eso ha permitido garantizar efectivamente la alimentación de las familias durante esos periodos. Agregar también lo potente que ha sido el papel de la agroecología en el fortalecer y mantener la cultura alimentaria de las personas. En muchas zonas se han perdido, incluso indígenas, y con esta, digamos, rescate de la agroecología ha hecho que se cohesione también la comunidad alrededor de una identidad alimentaria que es muy importante y que además le garantiza esa posibilidad de la alimentación, porque recogen lo que está en el entorno, ¿verdad? Las variedades que están en su entorno, lo potencian y han también desarrollado posibilidades de almacenamiento de esos alimentos para esos momentos de crisis. Y ahí está también esas tecnologías que se vinculan con todas las costumbres ancestrales, pero incorporando también novedades que ellos mismos han ido desarrollando. Vemos, por ejemplo, experiencias de casas de semillas, vemos las reservas estratégicas de granos, vemos, por ejemplo, también como también post cosecha hay formas de preservación que muchas también vienen desde el conocimientos indígenas, desde los conocimientos de los, en el caso de Honduras, de los afro-hondureños. Entonces, esa diversidad también es sumamente importante en los procesos.
I'm farmer peasant in France, and I produce milk in about 50 kilometers south of Geneva. And I'm member from La Confédération Paysanne and from La Via Campesina as well. I just want to say that in my farm, I stopped to use pesticide since few years. I stopped to use chemical fertilizer. But what I noticed, it needs much more work. And what the first things, if we want to go in this agroecological transition, it's to have more farmers. That's the first thing. And the second thing, we have to work to get to get where, especially in Europe or in France. In Europe, we need to work to have new seed, to get back to traditional seed, but we lost all our seed. I have some neighbors. They have to go to. We have a center in France called INA. They got 100 grams of seeds, and they start to grow them in their garden. And then after 5 years, they can grow them in fields. But because the seeds from the industry, they are not. We can't use in agroecological way, because they need fertilizer and they need pesticide. So we have so much work to do, especially the first. I think we need much more farmers, because sometimes you have to go in the field. You have to you can't only use tools. You have to go by hand to get grass, to get rid of bad grass or things like that. That's my
one short sentence.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, we also already improve our sheets. So it is what part of our effort to adapt with climate change. So by now we already improve paddy seeds. So we call SPI is our organization, SPI 20 and SPI 21st. And then second is also we also improve many biopesticide. So this part of the how we change from the pesticide. And then finally for public policy. So in last April, SPI invited our President of Indonesia, Bapak Jokowi, to plant local paddy seeds with the organic fertilizer. So after that, our President they release the policy to become mainstream on the organic fertilizer. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for all of these examples. I think they're excellent conclusions of this very rich debate. And indeed, it's interesting to finish on the innovative and very relevant aspects of agroecology, very much needed now in the changes that we are facing. And as we heard, it's not only an issue of for countries from the south, but also very much relevant for what's happening right now in the north. So let me thank everybody for their contribution to this important discussion. I'd like also to thank very much the Geneva Environmental Networks team with who we've been able to do this. It was quite a lot of work before and during this session. We will have, you'll see probably on your screen now, the next discussion that will be in this building in about 2 hours. And tomorrow we will have also 2 other discussions on the in the framework of the Geneva Toxic Free Talk. So once again, thank you for the FIAN International for being the main organizers of this discussion. And we wish you all a very good day. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next events of the Geneva Toxic Free Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.